Well, let's pray and then we'll get started. My kind of goal for today is just to kind of talk about what I'm trying to do with this class and kind of what the structure, the layout will look like. So, and I'll have a couple other little points at the end, but that's mostly just kind of an introduction, I suppose. All right, let's pray and we'll get started. Dear Lord, I just thank you so much for every person that's here. Lord, I just pray that you would be with us, that you would meet with us this morning, that you would guide our thoughts, Lord, that you would help us to think rightly about you and your world. Lord, I just pray that you would help us all to grow, help us to become more like you. I pray that this time would be a time of learning and encouragement, and that you would help us to do exactly that, just to learn to love you more and to desire to be more like you. And Lord, we just pray for your spirit that you would move in each one of us. And Lord, I pray that you would help me to know what to say and to know how to say it. And again, we just ask that you would bless this time together. That's in your name we pray. Amen. Um, all right. So as I said, let's see. There we go. I mainly, oh, that's all the way over here. I'm very technologically savvy. Um, all right. First of all, can everybody see the font? Okay. I tried to check it earlier and make sure I didn't make it too small. Is that's good? Okay. All right, good. All right. So here's what I want to do today is kind of talk about the class and why I think it's good for us to maybe have a class like this. So my goal is to just kind of introduce us to things. What's this class about? Well, really kind of what lies behind this is I'm really adapting some lectures that I gave at Liberty. So a few years ago, Liberty wanted to have this like big research class, and they realized that there's a lot of students that just didn't know how to do research. And so they're like, all right, so here's the one thing that we want to do is we want to have this general class that introduces students to the sciences, to the humanities, to arts, to all of these areas of study and learning. Um, and I wound up teaching that a good bit. And one of the things that happened is while we did cover very boring things like, what an experimental design is and all of this stuff that we're not going to get into in this, because we were looking at things like science, there was a lot of questions about like, well, what is science? How does it work? And how should we as Christians think about it? What is art? What is its purpose? And how should we as Christians think about it? And a lot of that information, I found that students thought it was very helpful for them, even kind of outside of the college research setting, and just in general, it helped them to kind of think about life and the world. Um, and so that's my plan, is for us to think more rightly about God's world. And so the Scott had a class that he wanted to do that was called Loving God's World. And so I was like, I have an idea for that. I think I can kind of adapt these lectures here, and that might be something that would be helpful. And because the truth is the world that God has made is both wonderful and beautiful and incredibly complicated. And sin has entered it, and that makes a lot of problems, a whole lot of problems, and even in terms of our understanding of it and how we should interact with things like science and stuff. And so I want to hopefully say some things that will be helpful for us. Another way that we can kind of think about like what this class is about is just to look at the topics that we're going to be going over. So this is a a rough outline. The mouse keeps wanting to like slide down. This is an outline of the course. So we're supposed to go 9 weeks. So the first week, introduction and a need for the course, what we're doing right now. Next week, I'll talk a little bit about knowledge and about work and about humility. I think those are 3 things that are very much misunderstood in our world, and things that are kind of like hopefully going to lay the foundation for us as we move forwards. And then we'll have a section on reading, about the importance of reading and maybe how to read well. And I'll try and give some like recommended resources for reading, for looking at stuff. And then the next week after that is just talking about kind of, I have a fancy pants word up there, I suppose, multifaceted, like a diamond. It has a whole bunch of like surfaces. It's got a bunch of different angles on it, and that's why it reflects light in a very pretty way. So multifaceted just means it has a lot of like different surfaces on it, lots of different angles and stuff. And so the idea that our world is kind of like that. It's very complicated. There's lots of different sides to things. And really, it's just about us thinking about our world kind of in general and about what is a science. So now when we think of science, we tend to think physics, biology, and stuff. There's actually an older view of science that sees it as being a lot broader than that. So we'll talk about those things there. And then if you look at like weeks 5, week 6, and week 7, those are hopefully going to be devoted to like the 3 main areas of learning. So one way that you could think about this is, again, because it's kind of from like a college. If you went to a college, you would major in one of these things, right? Your major would be physics or biology or chemistry, or your major would be history, or your major would be something in art. These are like main areas of study and learning. And so I want to look at kind of like each one of those. And as we go through them, the plan is to kind of say like, this is what it is and how we should think of it as Christians. And here's a major misunderstanding about it. So for example, the first one here with science. So we'll kind of talk about like, oh, here's what it is, here's what it covers, things like physics, biology, chemistry, those sorts of things. But how does it relate to religion? And there's a view that science and religion are like, enemies, and they don't get along very well. And I want to say, like, I don't think that's the right way that we should think about science. I think there's a much better way of looking at it, and it's fully compatible with religion. And so that's kind of like the major misunderstanding there is how science relates to religion, or science the only way to knowledge. These are kind of things that I want to talk a little bit about. Then in the humanities, examples of the humanities are things like history or literature, philosophy, religion. Those all fall under the humanities. We'll talk about that, what that is. And then again, a major misunderstanding within the humanities. And that major misunderstanding, because I'm thinking this is going to take like maybe 2 weeks for us to go through. So the misunderstanding is going to be about relativism, this view that like cultures can determine what's right or what's wrong, or what's right for you might not be what's right for me, and what's wrong for you might not be what's wrong for me. Everything is relative. It depends on who you are, where you are, those sorts of things. That's a major dominant way of looking at ethics, what's right and what's wrong in our culture. And so I want to talk about that and why I think that's a kind of a mistaken view. Then the next to last section is going to be about art, how we as Christians should think about art. And then the closing section, really for the most part, is just buffer room. I have a tendency sometimes to kind of go over a little bit. so that, I don't know exactly what we'll cover there, but probably it'll be art, actually. We'll get behind or something like that. So that's built in. So that's fine.
There's no test, is it?
No, there's no test. I don't have control over your grades or anything like that to threaten you with. And in fact, even outside like required reading and materials, homework, that sort of thing, there's none of that. What I will do though is I'm going to try for every lecture to do 2 things. One is at the beginning to have some quotes or scripture passages, something like that. So for this week, let's see here. I had these 2 that were up here. Ignorance is the mother not of devotion, but of heresy. That was Cotton Mather. He was very early American Christian. Basically, pilgrims come over, and he's one of the Puritans. So ignorance is the mother, not of devotion, but of heresy. And then a quote from J.P. Moreland. He's kind of like Dallas Willard Jr. You guys know I like Dallas Willard a lot. J.P. Moreland was his student. But he's a very good Christian philosopher in his own right. But anyways, he says our society has replaced heroes with celebrity. So my plan is to try and have. I'll go back to this. I gotta go. Oops. My plan is to try and have some nice quotes or something up there. You can maybe write those down if you think that they're helpful. And then at the end of each section to have kind of like recommended resources. So a lot of times they'll probably be books or something that I used when I was working on the lectures. And you're not going to be able to read everything, but maybe something was really interesting to you. Maybe something stuck out and you'd like to learn it. That would be a good thing to try and do, is to do those. So I'll have recommended resources. The format is mostly going to be lecture oriented. Sorry, Jeff. So the plan is basically, I don't know, have y'all been in like a Sunday school class where they have like a DVD or something? You know, what you do is you sit in the room, you play the DVD, everybody watches the DVD, and then somebody goes, well, what did you think? And then you like kind of talk about it. Well, that's my plan for this. Except instead of the DVD, I'll just be the 3D DVD. And you guys can watch me. One thing I'll try and build in sometimes where I ask questions like during the lecture stuff, but I'm really not good at like facilitating group discussion and asking questions. So, and I also have a tendency to get on like the lecture train, choo-choo. And I just like talk and keep going. If there's something that you're like, no, wait a minute, you know, that wasn't clear. I'm not so sure about that. Feel free at any point to just like stick up a hand and interrupt me. But also, I'm hoping for us, I think we run until 10:30. And my plan is to leave like 10 or 15 minutes or something at the end for that, you know, kind of group discussion. Again, like you think about like you watch the DVD and then I'll say, so what did you think about it? And then you guys can talk and share and correct me and help me out, or, you know, talk about additional things that are good for all of us to think about. I think the last point that I have here is, I usually say this in classes. There's people that are kind of more introverted, actually me. And then there's people that are a little more outgoing and extroverted. And one of the things that's really nice about the outgoing people is that they're much more free to like interrupt and ask questions, Dave. And I really appreciate that, because probably if you have a question, there's other people that have that same question. If there's something that's unclear to you, it's probably because I didn't make it clear and everybody's confused about it. So again, if you're one of the like more outgoing people or something, again, please feel free to like stick a hand up and interrupt me or something. It's just one of those things that I'm not very good at, is facilitating discussion and questions and things like that. So at that point, any questions about the formatting, or does that kind of make sense?
Would you do me a favor and go
Yeah.
back to those two quotes? I wanted to
Yeah.
take record one of them when my camera got messed up. There we go. I like that bottom one particularly. That J.P. Moreland, you may have said this while I was in my own happy place. About what time did he or she give that quote? Do you know?
That is
Is that a current?
Oh yeah, pretty much. So that's from a book that he wrote called Loving God with Your Mind. It's actually one that I have in the recommended resources at the end there. So this one here,
Yeah.
it's gone through like 3 editions. I think the edition that I have is like 2012, but I think it was first done in like 97.
Okay, so
Those are,
yeah,
I'm not, don't quote me on those. I'm not sure if those are exact, but I think that they're pretty close. Late 90s and then
well, it amazes
2010.
me how many quotes from even in like early 1900s or something are still so accurate with this whole idea of, well, even from the German guy that I can't think his name up right off that, but you know.
Mm.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, yeah, no. Um, all right, I guess if there aren't any other questions about formatting or course outline or what we're doing here, what I'm trying to suck you guys into suffering through. I thought what I would mainly go over for this first little bit was just kind of a justification for this course. Like again, it's like we're not really focusing on a book of the Bible, not really focusing on Bible study. We're kind of focusing on stuff that again is like what comes adapted from a university. What are we doing? Why are we doing that in a Sunday school class? And so I feel like I want to justify that a little bit and to talk about it. And I guess I should again say up front, you know, I hope that what I'm saying is scriptural and that it is based out of our faith. And I think that there's good commands for us to think rightly about these things. But I also think that there's a real need for this. So let me talk a little bit about kind of what I'll call like the current state of affairs. We live in a secular society. Sometimes people like to call it like a post-Christian society. So if you think about it, Christianity, it's a bunch of Christians that come over here. And, or sorry, if you want to think about America, it's a bunch of Christians that come over here and they're like, we want to escape religious persecution. And so a lot of the states and stuff are focused around developing places for people to worship for Christianity. And so Pennsylvania, you had William Penn. He's kind of like a Quaker guy. And he's like, I want a place where all of us Quakers can get together and we can, you know, worship God in the way that we think is right and fit and believe these sorts of things. But overall, over time since then, we've kind of lost that. And so there's still remnants of that, but in a lot of ways, we really are kind of a post-Christian secular society. And there's a couple major problems, I think, that I see. And the first one is that we're narcissistic. That's, again, just another one of those fancy pants words. It means you're focused on yourself, right? What is it that you think about? What is it that you're concerned with? Me. Me. Everything is about me. We're also very focused on pleasure, drug abuse, substance abuse, alcohol abuse. Those are all things that are very rampant in our society, that there's real problems with that. Things even like pornography addiction is rampant. Those are real problems that we have in our culture. People focused on pleasure. And then also we live in a very impatient, and this is kind of like the partner of impatience, rushed society, right? So I want things now. I want to click on my web page and I want it to load instantly. You know, we've forgotten like 20 years ago, it was like you clicked. And I remember like on the internet, my brother and I would like look at, there's a place that they had pictures of guns and firearms. And we would like click and you could watch it like, that's what the picture would do. And we would watch it. I was like, oh, there's the front sight, you know, it like took 2 minutes for a picture to load or something. And now it's like, boy, if it takes 2 seconds for that picture to load, it's like, we're going to go off to something else. You know, if this video doesn't grab my attention in 15 seconds, we're off to something else. We're very impatient. And then also like, we're just rushed. We can't sit still. We can't sit still and wait. And so that means we're always busy running around doing stuff, keeping ourselves busy. I think these are problems. I want to kind of talk about how they relate to those 4 areas there. So money, technology, education, and just time kind of in general. So let's look at each one of those here. Money. Um, so how does this relate to the issues that we were talking about? Well, for one, laziness. Why do we want money? So that we can avoid work, difficulty, and responsibility. Boy, if I just had the lottery, you know what? I wouldn't have to deal with my boss. I wouldn't have to work. I wouldn't have to do any of this stuff. It's a way of avoiding work, a way of avoiding difficulty. I wouldn't have to, like, be responsible with my finances. I could be as irresponsible as I wanted. I could spend all my money on flashlights and still have plenty left over, right? Like it's really a large part of that is laziness. We just don't want to work. And again, like you'll see a lot of these are very much related to each other. Narcissism, right? What do we want to spend our money on? If we had money, what do we want to do? Oh, car. Oh, I would buy this. I get this flashlight. I get these sorts of things. I have this kind of house. What about contributing to the good in the world? What about helping other people? Is that something that you think about? Is that something that we dream about? No, me, right? What about the money? How can I spend this on me? Um, right? And so narcissism really comes out through there. There's again a focus on pleasure. These three in particular, I think it's like they're all just bedfellows. Right? When we focus on me, we focus on what I want, on my pleasures. When we're focused on my pleasures and my wants, we're certainly not focused on working. We're not focused on what's good and what's right and doing that. We're just focused on fulfilling our own desires and our own pleasures. It's interesting. Did you know that if you win the lottery, your odds of going bankrupt increase tenfold? You are 10 times more likely to go bankrupt. And that's a very conservative estimate. There's a lot of people that think it's probably triple that. It's about 30 times more likely that you will go bankrupt if you win the lottery. Why? Well, because people get a bunch of money and you know what they do? They avoid work, they avoid responsibility, they spend all the money on themselves, they focus on themselves, they make horrible financial decisions, and then they go bankrupt and they have nothing left over. And they're in a worse case in which they started. And I think, again, like part of our focus on pleasure is part of the reason why we love celebrities. We love people that have great things, right? Not people who are great in terms of their character and stuff. It's interesting that I kind of like firearms. I'll try not to do too much gun stuff, but there was a guy, his name was Eugene Stoner, and he was a just very gifted engineer. And he's the guy that came up with basically the design for the AR rifle. And so that's what the military, it's the standard gun for the military. And he made millions and millions and millions of dollars doing that. How many of you have heard the name Eugene Stoner before? Nobody. What did he win? He didn't win fame. He didn't win respect. He didn't win honor. He won money. That's what he got. At roughly the same time, there was another gifted engineer in Russia, and he developed the designs for the AK-47, which maybe you've heard of. It's the most popular firearm in the entire world. It was what Russia used, and of course, Russia, through the spread of communism, gave it to Africa, the Middle East, China, a whole bunch of other countries. They all use guns that are basically based off of this guy's design. His name was Mikhail Kalashnikov. Do you know what he got? Nothing. He got no money. Every person in Russia knows the name Mikhail Kalashnikov. He was awarded medals. He had honor. He had all of that sort of thing. It was his contribution to the country, right? And so what is it that we want? It's like some people probably fame, power, that sort of thing, but probably much more money. Money, and things. That's what we want. We're not interested in honor. We're not interested in respect. We're interested in money. And you look at a lot of businesses and business people, you can tell that. Are they concerned with having a good reputation? Or are they concerned with making a profit? Right? Are we concerned with taking care of our employees? Or are we concerned with making a lot of money? Are we concerned with having a reputation of somebody who did what was right, who did what was respected? right? Or we have people that do rather shady, questionable things, right? Because they want money and stuff. And again, who is it that we fantasize being about? Probably people that have money, not so much, probably we don't sit around going like, oh, I wish I was John Wesley. That would be so cool. I wish I was, and that really is a change in culture. And that's something that is typical of the American culture and not necessarily typical of everywhere else, especially in history and stuff. Who was it that people loved? They loved heroes who died in battle, who died young, because they died with honor and glory, right? Those are things that they valued, and they're things that we just don't really care about so much. And we can ask questions like to our society, who do we say is a good person? Who do we say is well off? And it's the people that we worship. Those are the people that we are answering and saying, these are the people that are well off. These are the good people. And if you watch any music video, I'm sure all of you watch lots of music videos and stuff. Can you tell maybe some of this is dated for people that are a little bit younger? Right? But if you watch any music video, you'll see statements about who is a good person and who is well off. It's a person who has the big fancy car. It's a person who has the big fancy house. It's a person who's sitting in the hot tub surrounded by ladies. That's the person that we lift up. That's the person that we want to be like. It's not the person who does what's right. It's not the person who suffers for doing what's right and nevertheless, with courage and fortitude and perseverance, dies for what is right and what is good. No, we don't want that. Why? Because it goes against all of these things here. What pleasure is there in that for that? What is it that I'm going to get out of that? That sounds like a lot of difficulty. That sounds like a lot of work, right? And then also just us being very impatient and rushed. We want things fast and cheap. And it's interesting, like over the years, things have gotten cheaper and quality has gotten worse. You guys know that expression. They don't make things like they used to. I remember my parents, we had like a VCR, and that VCR, it was like 50 pounds. It was like this solid giant chunk of aluminum, like roughly the size of this podium. I mean, it was like huge. And it lasted for like, I don't know how long, like 20 some years, and it was used a lot. And then a part broke in it, and they couldn't get that part anymore. So they went to Walmart and they got a new one, and that thing lasted like a month, and it broke again, you know? And did you probably, maybe some of you remember like your parents or other people, because I feel like it was probably my grandparents that would do this. It's like, I know people that would take out loans when they first got married to buy furniture. Like, are we gonna take out a loan to get furniture now? It's like, no, but we have furniture in our house that's passed down, I think, 5 generations. What was it that people were focused on? They weren't focused on fast and cheap, right? They were willing to work, to make sacrifices, to get something of quality and to have it. Now, I want it now. I want it to have all the new bells and whistles. I want it to be the latest, coolest, greatest thing, right? That's what we prioritize. And we can kind of talk about corporations and blame them for making things cheaper and cheaper and chintzier and chintzier. But you know what? If when people had started doing that, nobody bought it, and they insisted on buying the nice stuff, that wouldn't have happened. So we have to be careful about where we point the feet or where we point our fingers. So anyway, so money, I think, is reflective of these kind of problems here. Oops. I have to keep clicking back into this for some reason. Technology, our use of technology, again, reflects some real issues in our society with laziness, narcissism, focused on pleasure, those sorts of things. Again, one of the things that technology does is it increases the effectiveness of your will, right? If I have a whole bunch of boards and I'm like, I want to put holes in these boards, right? Do you know what technology does? It helps me to do that. And it helps me to do it much more quickly, right? If I just have like one of those bow drills and I've got to like pull the bow back and forth, and there's a little stick and it slowly goes down. It's going to take forever for me to put 100 holes in a board. If I have some nice brand new Milwaukee drill, right? Oh, I could do those really quick. What if I have some giant drill machine? Well, I might even be able to do 100 holes all at once in 1 second, right? What I want done, it's able to do instantly and quickly. That's the main thing that technology does. If I want to go from point A to point B, it gets us there faster, right? What's quicker than walking? Riding a horse. What's quicker than riding a horse? Getting on a car, right? What's the newest car do? It goes faster, right? It helps us to do what we want quicker and faster. It empowers our will. And again, we use that to help us to avoid work. I don't want to have to do the hard work, so I'm going to use technology to help me to not do sorts of things. You know, there's massive problems with students using things like AI and stuff, right? To like write my papers. They have sorts of things that'll do that now. It'll help them to write their papers. They don't want to have to do the work themselves, right? We'll just let technology do it. We'll just let that deal with it. Narcissism. We just have this, we just have to have the latest and greatest, whether we need it or not. You know, it's like, I need the new iPhone 37, whatever number they're up to now. It's like, why? Well, because I have the 36. It's like, well, what do you need it to do? It's like, well, it's got a camera that does this on it. It's like, do you use that? It's like, it doesn't matter. You know, we've just got to have the latest and greatest thing, whether we need it or not. And again, a large part of that is that we certainly have to have better things than our neighbors. Right? We got to have the nicer truck. We got to have the nicer house. We got to have the nicer phone. We got to have the nicer clothes. We got to have the nicer things. All of this stuff. It's not about whether you need it. It's not about whether you use it. It's about feeding our egos. Right? I get what I want. I get it now. And again, you could see like these three often very related to each other, focused on pleasure. Right? We use technology to fulfill our desires. Yeah.
Just one other thing I was thinking about, it also ties in with the VCR analogy. The system is set up to discontinue support of older stuff.
Yeah.
So you get the iPhone 36 because the iPhone 33 is no longer supported.
Yeah.
And so the system is now built around that.
Right.
And even if you work on cars at all or whatever, you come to find out is they're almost disposable because you just can't fix things.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great illustration. And it kind of goes back to the previous one too. Why is it that people are making them like that? Well, because they can make more money, right? We can make more money by selling you the iPhone 37 and making your iPhone 36, defunct or obsolete so that it doesn't work anymore. You know, they don't, business people aren't making decisions about, how can we make the best product? How can we serve our customers? How can we do what's right here? And again, like lots of problems with business people, but where do business people come from? They come from us. That's where they come from. It's our kids, it's our neighbors, it's our brothers. And we as society have contributed to that. And again, what sorts of people do you want to be? Do you want to be a person who's like that businessman and has a lot of money? Or do you want to be like the businessman who doesn't have very much money at all, but does what is right and does what is honorable? Kind of thing. I don't like that second option so much, And so we're pushing people into that system. But yeah, that's a great addition. Yeah, so we want to use technology to fulfill our desires. And again, we're very impatient, rushed. We want things now, and technology enables us to do things faster. And it's maybe worth pointing out, a big problem with technology being able to empower our wills to give us what we want is, what happens when we want bad things? What happens when we want something that's evil, right? If somebody, says something mean to me or does something that I don't like, and I have to walk to their house, and it's 2 miles away, and it takes me almost an hour to get there. Well, I've got some time to think. I've got some time to cool down. What happens when they do it and I'm in a 6,000-pound vehicle that's capable of doing 0 to 60 in less than 7 seconds? And they cut me off and they do something that I don't want. And that vehicle will say, whatever you want, I'll do it right away. Right? You know, there's massive problems with road rage. The AAA reported 71 million drivers in 1 year reported honking, driving aggressively, making rude gestures. I don't know what that could be, at other drivers. 71 million people all do that. And it's like 50 million people for things like purposefully driving close to other people, you know, or purposefully blocking other people who are trying to merge, or purposefully cutting other people off. All those numbers are like 50 to 70 million
Well,
people.
there's probably only 200 million drivers in the US.
Yeah.
You're talking about a third of all people driving?
Yeah. Yeah.
Have you done it?
Have you driven in a city? No, I'm not. I've
Yeah.
never driven in a city.
And so, you know, like part of the real problem with technology is, again, it empowering wills, and we have very broken wills. We want things that are not good. You know, there's all those jokes about like a genie appears to 3 people or 1 person or whatever, and they're like, you know, what are the 3 wishes that you want? There's one good one about, there's this very poor farming couple, and they're working and digging in their field, and they find a lantern, and the woman picks it up, and the guy's like, what's that? And he goes over and touches it, and the genie pops out. The genie says, well, both of you found me and were holding me and stuff, so you guys decide amongst yourselves, but you get 3 wishes, whatever you want. And the woman says, I just love sausages. I wish I had a sausage. And so, like, right away, she's got this great sausage. And the husband gets so angry, and he's like, you idiot, what have you done? We could have asked for anything and stuff. And you asked for this stupid sausage. I wish that sausage was on your nose. So then she's got a sausage on her nose. And so then they go, oh dear, you know, what are we gonna do? And so they use their last wish to wish that the sausage wasn't on her nose. And they have nothing at the end, you know? And or there's the one about the 3 guys that are in the desert, and they find a lamp, and the genie pops out, and the genie says, I'll grant each one of you 1 wish. And then one guy says, oh, he says, well, I'm a pilot. I wish there was a plane I could fly out of here. And so the genie, all of a sudden, a plane, guy jumps in, flies off the plane. The guy says, oh, I don't know how to fly, but I just wish I was back home with my family. And so he just disappears, is back home with his family. The 3rd guy looks around and he says, after I wish, make my wish, do you go away? And the genie says, yeah, I won't be by myself. I wish my friends were back.
Oh.
And if you think about it, all of those jokes, the thing is about getting what we want. You know, we're not very wise. And we're certainly not very good at making snap and split decisions. And technology's ability to more and more quickly give us what we want is really something that's very dangerous and problematic, right? And when was the last time that some inventor thought, yeah, I can do this, but should I do it? Is this a good idea? You know, and when was the last time that we looked at some new and greatest thing and said, yeah, I could buy this, but should I buy it? You know, is that a good idea? And so technology kind of feeds into this problem. Education. Again, oh yeah.
Something that happened to me when I started my graduate program at Virginia Tech. The very first class I took was in educational methods. And the guy said, okay, classroom of 40, how many of you have never touched a computer? Now, there were 11 of us who had never touched a computer. This was in, I don't even remember the year now, but he said, okay, you 11 have homework tonight. The rest of you guys have a night off. And so he gave us this packet of material that we had to take to a building, not on the main quadrangle, but over across from somewhere there in Blacksburg. And this was even before PCs. This was punch cards.
Mm-hmm.
And so he said, tomorrow morning, I expect each one of you to present to me a stack of punch cards. So we all found the building. Took us about an hour for all of us to get back together. We started working at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. At that point, Virginia Tech had the second largest mainframe next to one of the New England schools. And it took us from 1 o'clock in the afternoon until 11 o'clock at night to come up with 11 batches of those cards, punch cards, that were accurate. Because if you made a mistake on one,
Yeah.
you had to throw out the whole batch and start again. So technology, to me, at that point in time, had a very nasty taste. And then we took our batches in the next morning, we gave them to the professor. He said, good, now you all are on an equal footing with all these other students. No, I wasn't on an equal footing with the other students, but nonetheless, by the time I finished my graduate program, I typed my own dissertation on a combination of mainframes that they had and PCs. So if we were doing, data entry, we went to the PCs, to the mainframes, and if we were doing other things. So it was very interesting to be kind of identified as one who didn't know as much. And that continued technologically through a lot of experiences that I had the whole time that I was working, because people would send me requests and they'd say, okay, send back blah, 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 blah. And I'd have to go find someone else who knew what that was talking about. So technology to me had kind of a to it. And it still does. There are things that my daughter can do and do in 5 minutes that it takes me 45 minutes to do. But I still have a home computer. And I'm glad I do. But it doesn't facilitate nearly as much as a lot of the things that I could do otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm not, like anti-technology and stuff. Like, again, there's certain things that like, it is good. You know what technology allows us to do? See our grandkids. To see our kids that have moved away and stuff. That's a wonderful thing. You don't have to spend 14 hours in a car, all of this stuff to see them. You can see them more often. That's a good thing. That's a wonderful thing. Our desire to see our kids, to spend time with them, technology facilitates that will. It facilitates and helps us to have our desires. And that's fine. And that's good. And it is nice when, if there's something that like, there's just not any real value in it and we can do it in 5 instead of 45 minutes or something, that can be a good thing. That's fine. But, right, when we have all of these other problems and we just use it to avoid work that we should be doing, and we use it as kind of like a God, as something that we desire and value above everything else, that starts to be when it's a problem, right? So technology in and of itself isn't evil or isn't a problem. It's kind of us that like we're the problem. Okay, yeah, thank you. So let me talk a little bit about education here. So again, like laziness in education, boy, cheating is a major issue. There was a study that was done at Rutgers, and 70% of students admitted to cheating in classes. 70% of students admit to cheating in classes. What's the point of going to school if you're not going to learn? And people use AI to write their papers for them. They learn nothing, they know nothing, they gain nothing, but I don't have to do the work. That's what they're willing to sacrifice everything for. It's just laziness, right? And again, part of the hope of undergraduates, part of like the way that we sell college is that it's a way for them to get money without having to work, you know? And it's like, you don't have to work in the factory, you get to run the factory. You get to sit in a chair, you get way more money that way. You don't have to like be the salesperson that sells stuff. You get to be the person that owns a company and does nothing. That's a huge part of the interest in the way that we kind of sell education. Narcissism, again, boy, everything is about getting what you want. And education is about empowering me to get what I want to get, right? And so, again, this is very much tied with that, the next point and with money. Focus on pleasure, right? School is a means to money, money is a means to pleasure, okay? So in other words, I care about getting a college degree because a college degree means more money for me. And more money for me means more things for me, right? More money, more stuff. And unfortunately, universities have bought into that, and they have their own slogan too. And that is a college degree for ye equals more money for me, right? And it becomes this consumeristic commercial trade, right? We will sell you a slip of paper so that we get money and so that you can go get money. That's the idea that's behind it. And of course, as you allow for more and more cheating, as you lower academic standards and you care less about people actually learning, right? Then that piece of paper becomes worth next to nothing, And we'll probably talk about this some in the next lecture, but it's like I used to try and tell students, it's like, like that paper will not grant you success and satisfaction in life. Like knowledge does that. You understanding how to do things. Yeah.
So if you get your daughter or your son-in-law to show you how you do something on the phone, is that cheating? Or your grandkids?
Yeah, probably not. I don't think so.
Man, I'm not cheating, baby.
Joseph, just real quick, going back to this
Mhm.
whole school, the higher education. It's not only that students are paying to go. That's not the school. That's not where the real money comes from, right? It comes from endowments from people that have been to the school and have made gazillions of dollars
Yeah.
and pour big money back into the school for their recognition or whatever.
Yeah.
So the school has the whole system is built on dollars. It's not
Yeah.
built on education.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly right. One of the big problems that I see now is it used to be, you had a class, I don't know, we'll call it English 100, and you had 10 professors that taught English 100, and they all taught it slightly differently. They all had full-time jobs at the university, and they taught various classes. And one of the things that is just rampant across universities and colleges is they figured out that they can save a lot of money. Of what they do is they have one person, they have Dave develop English 100. And he's the person that develops a class and he does everything. And then they have 9 other people work part-time and then just teach the classes. They don't get to develop the class. Of course, they don't get as much money, You're not a full professor, so of course you don't get as much money, but you have to do the same work, right? And it's a way of them like controlling things, and they'll say, oh, well, it's because, we want to get the best person at teaching English 100 and have them teach everybody. Well, they can't do that. Oh, but through this system we can, And it's like, no, every study shows when you do that, the quality of teaching drops down drastically. Even if you have a great design course, people have another person will have trouble teaching that course, and they'll do much worse than if they had just developed things on their own, and done it to the best that they can. So, yeah, so school very much focused on pleasure, focused on money, college degree thing, and then again, like being impatient and rushed, we treat education like it's a product, like all products and culture that we were talking about. The idea is to make it cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and sell it for more and more and more and more, right? And so I'll say it this way. I know people that have taught at the university level that have maintained academic standards and then have serious issues with the higher ups in education, right? And they say, look, if you fail this person, they will stop taking classes. And if they stop taking classes, you know what happens? They stop giving us money. Let them through, let them pass so that they can go on to take this other course, right? And it's, and so again, like we treat education like a product, we lower the standards, we lower the quality, and we do it so that we can try and make more and more money. Might have to speed up a little bit. Time, again, like just how we spend and use our time, we see like the same sorts of problems here, laziness. We waste time, and any free time often goes to our phones and to entertainment. The narcissism aspect, us being focused on ourselves. We use busyness to stroke our egos, and we want to spend time on ourselves. Have you ever been tempted to say like, I'm just so busy this week? It's a way of sounding important. It's a way of sounding like, yeah, I got big stuff in the works. I'm a big deal. Like our culture, it values being busy, right? And it sees as, well, you must be important. You must be doing something if you're busy and always running around doing things, right? And so we use busyness to stroke our own egos and so that we can say no to other people when they ask us to do something. We can spend time on ourselves to do what it is that we want to do. It's interesting that we're so obsessed with saving time, and yet it's the thing that we have so little of, right? I mean, people are like, oh, I'm doing this to save time, to save time, to save time. It's like, where's all that go? Like look at cultures that are far less technologically advanced, right? Which means it takes way longer for them to do things. And you'll see that the pace of life is far less hurried. It's far less rushed, right? They're far less focused on saving time, and yet they have way more of it. What's the problem here? And there's over 12,000 people were killed in speeding related traffic incidents, and I forget what year it was. I forgot to put that down. I think it was either 2019 or 2023, but it was pretty recently. 1 year, 12,000 people killed in speeding incidents, because we're rushing. Have to get there quickly. Again, we want to spend all of our time on pleasure and having fun. So again, we try and use technology to help us to avoid the things that we don't do and then to feed into our desires, And so it's like we can't spend an hour doing some sort of work, but we can spend an hour scrolling through Facebook or Instagram or whatever. And again, we're just very impatient and rushed. We live in a quick fix culture. We want everything and we want everything now. We don't want to wait for those pictures to load on the internet or something. All right, I'm kind of going through that because I got a couple of things that I want to do. So what I want to say is like all of these things, all of these problems that we see in society, like how did we get in such a mess? How did we wind up with these problems? And the really short answer is the fall. People sinned, they departed from God's good plan, and brokenness ensued in every area of our lives, in terms of money, in terms of education, in terms of time, in terms of technology, right? The fall is the short answer to the problem. But, I think there's some things that we as Christians have not done well. And there's things that we have done that have contributed to this problem. And I want to kind of focus on that thing a little bit. And really what I've kind of titled it as anti-intellectualism. And so let me talk about kind of some of its causes and some of its effects. So first of all, in America, there was several major revivals that happened in the early to mid 1800s. Charles Finney, wonderful guy, was one of the people that was very much associated with these revivals that happened. And there was massive conversions that took place. There was a tremendous amount of good that came from these. But there were also some problems that were associated with it. And those problems weren't corrected and weren't addressed, and we're suffering from those effects now, okay? So I'm not trying to just say these were evil, terrible things that happened. No, no, they were very good things, but they had some problems with them. One of the things that happened in these revivals was there was a big emphasis on emotion and conversion. One of the things that's interesting, if you think about the word revival, it means you were alive, you died, and now you're alive again, right? You're brought back. Revivals before this period were when Christians had become complacent and Christians were revived. They were reinvigorated with a new desire to love God and to serve Him and to give Him everything. And these revivals shifted away from Christians to non-Christians, right? And it became much more about conversion. And one of the things that happened then from that was that there was a lack in focus on discipleship, on getting Christians to do what was right, to live out their Christian faith. It wasn't about you Christians, you're not doing what you're supposed to. You're not loving God. You're not serving Him. You're not knowing Him. You're not following His plans. We need to do that. And if we do that, we'll radically change the world. But the shift started to be much more, these people, they need to say this prayer. They need to make this kind of conversion. A lot of that stuff is true. People do need to pray. People do need to be converted. Again, I'm not trying to say that those aren't important, but I'm saying if you do that and you don't have discipleship too, then Christians become complacent and they become ineffective, right? And so this emphasis on emotion rather than understanding was another big thing. How is it that you appeal to people to come to an altar or something? You preach this great fiery sermon, right? You use emotion and then you play music, maybe in the minor key or something like that. That's sad. And you draw people to come up to the altar, right? It's an appeal to emotion. It's not an appeal to the intellect and to understanding. Those are shifts that all happen from that. One of the effects of this actually is that at the same time that these revivals happened and shortly after them, there was a massive rise in heresies. Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses all came from the Burnt Over District. So the Burnt Over District is largely an area of New York where these revivals happened and occurred. And there were so many people that were kind of set on fire for God. So many people were converted that they called it the Burnt Over District. You know, the whole thing had just been set on fire for the love of God. And it was out of that exact area that a number of heresies rose up. And the reason is because of that lack of teaching, because of a lack of emphasis on discipleship and over an emphasis on emotion. You had a large number of people that came into the Christian faith and then weren't taught it and didn't know the details of it and didn't understand things. And you had heresies that came out of that. Christian Science, it didn't arise from the Burnt Over District, but it was connected to the revivals and came up at the same time. You know, these are the two largest Christian heresies in the U.S., Mormonism and Jehovah's Witnesses. And they come out of the same time. There was also kind of what I'll call an overreaction to the rise of liberal theology. I'm really going to have to try and go through this quickly. But liberal theology was a major problem that started to rise and develop at the same point in time. And it had an emphasis of denying the authority of Scripture and of rejecting anything supernatural. So Jesus isn't divine. He's just a great teacher, right? Christianity is just about societal reform, right? It's not about changes of hearts, right? It's about changing these social structures. Those sorts of things were big emphasis. And at the same time, while that needed to be opposed, it needed to be fought against, there's also a tendency, right, to go too far in the opposite direction, right? And so there wasn't any interest in engaging with culture. You know, rather than making Christianity just about engaging with culture, it then turned into Christianity has nothing to do with culture, and it's just about where you go after you die. That was kind of one of those overreactions. It swung too far. It didn't have something to say for how we live here and now, how we live as businessmen. how we live as people who use technology, how we live as husbands and fathers and those sorts of things, right? It just had to be, it got reduced down to, did you say this prayer? And if so, then this is where you'll go when you die. There's nothing else, you know? That is something that's important, and we need to talk about it, but it's not everything. And then lastly is, at the same time, Christians withdrew from science and from education. So as you had this kind of liberal theology come in, it tended to come in from the universities, from people that were educated. And you had Darwin, right? So Darwin writes at the same time period, roughly. And there was a bunch of people that just said, that's it, you know? Science, education, culture, those are all anti-Christian things. And so they withdrew. And at the same time, you started to have foundings of other universities that came up later. We're not going to engage with the secular thinkers. We're just going to start our own kind of school of thought. And it became very isolated. So these are problems. And I want to say again, like, these are really, again, like deviations from God's plan for the world. And so I want to say, first of all, like, the origin of Sunday school really goes back to John Wesley. So one of the things is you have John Wesley in the 1700s, and he's preaching to these people, and there's a bunch of Christians that start to take their Christianity seriously, and there's a bunch of people that start to convert, and they realize, you know what, like, the working conditions in England at the time are really terrible. They're really bad, and there's a lot of people that don't have much of a chance in life. They don't have much of a chance in life because they don't have any education. And so, you know what we'll do? Before church, come, we'll teach you to read. Come, we'll teach you arithmetic. We'll teach you math. It was Sunday school. It was school that was available to people that didn't have an opportunity to attend the school and to help them to think about things correctly. Really, like, God's plan for the world. I want to kind of actually go back to Genesis. One of the things that's interesting and that we're prone to kind of miss in reading Genesis 1 is that creation is meant to be a temple, right? So in Genesis 1, there's a lot of temple building language when God creates the world. And there's a lot of garden and Edenic imagery in the tabernacle and the temple. If you look at places like I think First Kings and Exodus, those sorts of areas where it's talking about the development of the tabernacle, you have imagery of pomegranates, of fruit, of trees. There's garden imagery all throughout the design of the temple. And the temple was meant to reflect the world as a whole. I'm a little rushed, but I feel like I can't leave this out. Part of the idea behind the temple was that it was the universe, but instead of done vertically, it was done horizontally. So you had giant basins of water at the opening, the oceans, and you walk through that, and then you had pillars, and then you went up and up and up, and you know what you went into? You went into heaven, into the presence of God. Right? And so there's this idea that the temple is reflective of the world as a whole. And God designed the world to be a place for his presence. You can see that in Isaiah 6:3, 11:9. One of the things that's interesting about Habakkuk is these two passages of scripture talk about how the whole world is filled with the glory of God. And Habakkuk says one day people will have the knowledge of the glory of God filling the whole world. The problem is that we don't see it. That's part of our brokenness and fall, is that the whole world is filled with his glory, but we're blind to it. And so the world is a place for people to be in God's presence. It's a temple. And part of what God does on the seventh day when he rests is he goes and lives. He creates the world. He creates it wonderfully, beautifully. He populates it, and then he goes and lives there. And what is it that happens in the very next chapter? And in chapter 1, in both of those, is we have people. People are called to live and to serve God in the world. What is it that a priest does, right? You have a temple. A temple is where the God lives. A priest is the person who lives in the temple, in the presence of the God, and serves the God. And what Genesis 1 is saying is all of humanity was meant to be this royal priesthood. Adam lives in the temple that God created. He lives in the presence of God, and God tells him to rule and to have dominion over the world, to serve him in that temple. I think I have actually Genesis 1:28 here. Right, so God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that rules on the ground, right? This is the plan for mankind, is, right, the work that God had begun for them to finish it and for them to do it under his guidance and in his presence. And of course, the problem is that people rebel and people go against that. And so Eden is kind of like the archetypal sanctuary and Adam is the archetypal priest. Let's see, actually, I think I did cover all of that. And so, right, we need to revive this plan and fight against anti-intellectualism, passivity, greed, busyness, and narcissism. It's maybe worth thinking, like, I think there's certain technological advances that we probably would have made a lot earlier if it hadn't been for the fall. We probably would have understood physics much faster. How much has war, how many geniuses has that killed? God gives Adam work to do, to have dominion over the world. And we would probably have greater dominion over it, right, if it hadn't been for the fall. Right, and so we fight against these things by focusing on knowledge, on hard work, on humility, thinking of ourselves less. That's like the opposite of narcissism, and having a better understanding of the world. And we're called with God to contribute to the good in the world. That is what your life and work is to be about. It's not to be about your own personal pleasure, about your own desires. It's about you working with God and bringing about good in the world. That's what he wanted Adam to do, to live and to work with him and to do good, right? And so my aim is to help us to kind of start on this path, especially in terms of thinking rightly about the world, really with the aim that we can better understand it and live in it. So I've officially given us 0 time for Q&A and discussions, but I don't know. I guess if there's anything that y'all want to mention or say or something, try and do that real quick. Oh, and I'm supposed to put that up. So these are some books that I think are helpful if you want. C.S. Lewis book, the J.P. Moreland one, a book by Mark Knoll, Joseph Pieper. This one, it's really good, but he's German and it's translated, and that can be a little. It's definitely more challenging than the first 3. I'll try and not just have books and sorts of things, but other stuff. There's a guy that has a YouTube channel, Gavin Ortland. He's a Baptist pastor. His channel has a lot of good stuff on it.
So the scripture that kept coming on my mind over so much of what you were talking about was 1 John 2:15, do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in it. For everything in the world, the cravings of sinful man, the lust of his eyes, and the boasting of what he does and does, comes not from the Father, but from the world. The world and its desires pass away, but the man who does the will of God lives forever. When it lists out, the cravings of sin, lust of his eyes.
Yeah.
Those are the themes through all.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, I guess y'all are dismissed. Thanks for suffering through.
Thanks.